Coba, coba. Asyik tatario. Baby, namo baye. ko ukromo na wo meku samo ko ukromo na wo meku papa samo ko ukromo na wo meku Papa samo ko ukromo na wo meku Come baya dada Come baya yeah Come baya dada yeah
Ododio. Ododio. Oh, Auntie Yele, Mademoiselle, Yele, Yele, oh, 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 Yele, Yele, Auntie Yele, Mademoiselle, oh, 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 Auntie Yele, Mademoiselle, oh, 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 Auntie Yele, Mademoiselle, oh, 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 allons, fistine, joyina de. Nana whatever be man you wa into o katande don't take me your yellow Olonye trogo bae Olonye trogo balo Olonye trogo bae Olonye trogo balo Iye mademoiselle. Antiele mademoiselle. Ono piscine joinare. Dana kwasaba bima nyowa. Tuwo katande. Yon dekabi yawonyalo. Nolonye trobo baye. Nolonye trobo balo. Wezo kaka. Via vide lo. Via vide lo. Via vide lo. Ya que ya huele me ya fifi. Ey baro flower me. Besane to ya fifi. Via vide lo. Via vide lo. Awe ke membe yade. Sawe to de nyono mebe. De kale trele le yibode. De kale chende lulode. Tra les toits les gentils, tra les toits les sommets, et tra les toits les gentils, ou tra les toits les sommets. Via vide lo, via vide lo. Palongo. Balongo binanu mejonade. Balongo. Balongo binanu mejonade. Balongo. Balongo binanu mejonade. Ya ye kono mo me vorotu. Ya ye kono mo me torotu la. Ya ye kono mo me nerotu. Ero terende. Balongo. Balongo. Yaro ajowa. Yaro ajowa. Cherinya jowa mebe mega wakumula ne wakuma mabanyo ne wakuma mabanyo yaro ajowa yaro ajowa yaro ajowa Yaro ajowa. Cherinya jowa malova jowa. Cherinya jowa mebe mega wakumula ne wakuma mabanyo ne wakuma mabanyolo. Yaro ajowa. Yaro ajowa. La Lale mulo, lale muye toma lale mulo, lale, 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 toma lale mulo, lale. Lale mulo, lale muye toma lale mulo, lale, 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 toma lale mulo, lale. Atino pudowe, yetino pudowe, atino pudowe na mauga na igbe na mena jate, mena jaba atino pudowe, yetino pudowe, atino pudowe na mauga na igbe na mena jate. Lale mulo, lale muye kama lale mulo, lale. Mulo nale muye kama nale mulo nale nale kama nale mulo nale atino pudowe ebino pudowe atino pudowe na mauga na igbe na menajate menaja batino pudowe ebino pudowe atino pudowe na mauga na igbe na menajate menajate. Waya 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 gola, yaje waya 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 gola, waya 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 go, aye waya 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 go, waya 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 gola, aye waya 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 go, waya 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 gola, aye waya 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 go. Ezula male zula male zu, zula male zula male zula, zula male zula male zula, aje zula male zula male zu, zula male zula male zula, aye zula male zula male zu. Ododo, majido jido manyale, ajido manyale manyale, jido manyale, jido manyale manyale. Ajido jido manyale, jido manyale manyale, jido jido manyale, jido manyale manyale, Ajido jido manyale, jido manyale manyale, jido manyale, jido manyale manyale, majido manyale, jido manyale manyale, jido manyale, jido manyale manyale, ayoye ayoye, ayoye ayoye. Ayoye, 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 ayoye. Melau, melau. Melau, 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 melau. Namanu manjahe, namanu manjahe, namanu manjahe. Oh, 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 oh. What go away, what go away, what go away, what go away, what go away. Namanu manjahe, namanu manjahe, namanu manjahe. Oh, 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 oh. Da 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 hum da hum da hum da 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 hum da hum da hum da 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 hum da 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 hum 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 da da. ye da 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 hum da hum da hum da, ye da 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 hum da hum da hum da 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 da, ye da 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 hum da da, ye da 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 hum da da, da 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 hum da da, ye da 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 hum da da. Ma vide pepe gabenya gabenya la 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 vide pepe a vide pepe gabenya gabenya la 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 vide pepe. La vide pepe gabenya gabenya 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 la a vide pepe gabenya gabenya la vide pepe gabenya gabenya la vide pepe gabenya gabenya la vide pepe gabenya gabenya e passe au port gabenya la vide pepe président Kwacha gabenya la vide pepe gabenya la vide pepe gabenya e policier au port gabenya la vide pepe soja au Kwacha gabenya la vide pepe gabenya la vide pepe gabenya la vide pepe lawyer au port gabenya la vide pepe teacher au Kwacha gabenya la vide pepe gabenya la vide pepe gabenya e awoga figa to enye mande gae figa to ene so me be gae figa to enye mande e gae figa to ene so la e gae na na to biodo me na se e gae nya na nyonu jo na sukwe ba fide pepe gabenya la vide pepe gabenya la vide pepe gabenya la vide pepe gabenya la vide pepe. Merci beaucoup.
Hello.
Please be seated. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, colleagues. And welcome to the installation of the fourth Kwame Nkrumah Chair here in the Great Hall at the University of Ghana. Thank you very much, Ghana Dance Ensemble, for that lively procession in. We are very grateful for your presence here today, and we can assure you that this is going to be a very, very brief, but as always, impressive ceremony. Thank you once again. Without taking much of your time, I will respectfully invite the Director of the Institute of African Studies, Professor Georgie Chikata, Professor of Sociology, to give us her welcome address. Thank you.
Thank you so much, my colleague, Dr. Kpesa White. The Vice Chancellor, Professor Nana Abba Amfo, our host and chair for this auspicious occasion, the fourth occupant of the Kwame Nkrumah Chair in African Studies, Professor Amina Mama, past occupants of the chair, Mr. Eric Asobonten, Managing Director of AngloGold Ashanti Ghana Limited, and his colleagues, Pro-Vice Chancellors for Academic and Student Affairs, the Registrar, the Provost of the College of Humanities, Provosts of other colleges, representatives of ministries and public institutions, ambassadors, other members of the diplomatic corps, fellow deans and directors, members of the Institute of African Studies Management Committee, past directors of the Institute, alumni, friends, and partners of the Institute of African Studies, representatives of civil society, our students from Presbyterian Boys Secondary School, family, friends, and colleagues of Professor Amina Mama, members of the Nkrumah's family, faculty, students, and staff, distinguished invited guests, all our participants here at the Great Hall and online. On behalf of the entire Institute of African Studies, which is at the College of Humanities at the University of Ghana, I'm pleased and proud to warmly welcome you to the installation of the fourth occupant of the Kwame Nkrumah Chair in African Studies at the University of Ghana. The Kwame Nkrumah Chair in African Studies was established to deepen research and learning on the history, trajectories, and current concerns of Africa and her diasporas. The chair seeks to honor Ghana's founding president in recognition of his foresight and commitment to academic excellence in Ghana and Africa, his instrumentality in the establishment of the Institute of African Studies, the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, and the Encyclopedia Africana project. These were projects he saw as crucial to decolonization and the harnessing of the self-assertion, knowledge, and confidence of Africans in the interests of the peoples of Africa. Even more importantly, the chair honors Dr. Nkrumah's intellectual and political contributions in his effective politics on the global stage, his leadership in the non-aligned movement and organization of African unity, through his support for and solidarity with other liberation movements across Africa, and through his prodigious scholarship, the books he authored, and the important speeches he delivered. These were often teaching moments for a nation and a continent. The continued resonance of the ideas he espoused mark him out as an uncommon visionary, but also points to the enormity of the unfinished business of Africa's development and the continuing salience of the social sciences and the humanities in securing Africa's future. The importance of the chair to the Institute's mission, which is to engage in the regeneration of Africa and her people through knowledge production, recovery, dissemination, application, and presentation, cannot be overstated. The chair serves as an ambassador of the Institute and of the ideas and ideals of Kwame Nkrumah. It is also a hub of knowledge production and dissemination, the exchange of ideas, and the nurturing of a new generation of scholars of African studies. The IAS in turn provides what we hope is a fertile soil in which the chair has taken root. We are especially proud to have sustained the Nkrumah Chair, which is now in its 13th year. We are grateful that the chair has had talented and globally acclaimed occupants, Professor Kofi Anyidoho, Professor Jacob Gordon, Professor Horace Campbell, and now is occupied by Professor Amina Mama. It is special for the IAS that she is the first female occupant and also the first to explicitly focus on issues of the cultural economy, feminism, and the next generation. This, in our view, helps to deepen and broaden attention to some of the enduring preoccupations of the Institute, namely supporting knowledge production on empowering and liberatory cultures, the next generation, women, working people, and Africa's transformation. In taking up these matters, Professor Mama brings into center stage constituencies that we either pay lip service to or often ignore, but who are pivotal in the realization of Nkrumah's vision of a united and prosperous Africa. While it is well known that Africa's anti-colonial struggles were led and powered by relatively young people, and their most consistent and sacrificial support base were the women and the youth, these groups have continued to struggle to put their agendas and grievances on the front burner of politics and policies in Africa. We are also only now realizing the vast and tapped value of Africa's cultural economy, whose workers play a pivotal role in the decolonization of the continent, but whose intellectual production continues to be appropriated to enrich others, along with Africa's natural resources and labor power. Professor Mama has already shown us what is possible with these topics. She arrived to take up the chair in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic in January 2021. While we could not organize her installation, she settled in and worked with a team of volunteers, a local organizing committee chaired by Dr. Deborah Tobra of the Institute, with members drawn from the Institute, the university, and outside the academy, as well as an international advisory committee to organize for the first time in the Institute's history a fully digital third Kwame Nkrumah Festival on the theme Pan-Africanism, Feminism, and the Next Generation, Liberating the Cultural Economy. Hugely successful, ambitious in scope, and attended by thousands of scholars and cultural workers and activists online, the festival resulted in the production of a prodigious body of knowledge in the areas of politics, economics, the social and relational, artistic expression in different genres, storytelling, literature, film, music, dance, and performance. This body of work will be invaluable in teaching and learning at the University of Ghana and in other universities across Africa and the globe for years to come. The festival's robust digital platform, designed by a Pan-African team of young creatives led by Letumusa Kulube, has been preserved for use for future digital festivals and other programs. In this second year of her tenure, Professor Mama will continue with her research and speaking mandates and complete her tenure at the end of August 2022. The Institute of African Studies hopes to continue to attract top-notch scholars to the chair. We also hope to begin to support Nkrumah PhD fellows to research topics that resonate with the chair's purpose and agenda, and with our aim of growing African thinkers for the 21st century. To advance these objectives, we have to succeed in our efforts to replenish the AngloGold Ashanti Ghana Limited endowment. We hope that as many of you as possible will become friends of the Kwame Nkrumah Chair in African Studies and support its projects and its sustainability. As for today, we are pleased that you all could join us for this long-delayed installation and to hear Professor Mama's inaugural lecture. Please enjoy the program, which has been designed by an Institute of African Studies Planning Committee chaired by Dr. Irina Piening-Addo, working in cooperation with the Office of the Vice-Chancellor, the Office of the Provost of the College of Humanities, and the Public Affairs Directorate, to whom we are deeply grateful. Once again, welcome and thank you for joining us both in person and online. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Georgie Chikata, Director of the Institute of African Studies. So now that she has eloquently informed us of the reason why we are here, as always, a gathering of this nature would need somebody to steer affairs to a successful end. To introduce the chairperson for this program, we have the Provost of the College of Humanities, Professor Dan Ofori. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you. Vice Chancellor, Pro-Vice Chancellor, Registrar, Provosts, Prof Amina Mama, ladies and gentlemen, our chairperson for this afternoon's event is a professor of linguistics of the University of Ghana and also the Vice Chancellor. Prior to becoming Vice Chancellor, she served as the Pro-Vice Chancellor responsibility for academic and student affairs, Dean of the School of Languages, and Head of the Department of Linguistics. She's an experienced academic and university administrator with close to 20 years of experience in the higher education sector. Prof Sanfo has served in various leadership capacities, including President of the Linguistics Association of Ghana. Currently, she serves on the Consultation Board of the International Pragmatics Association. She is also an Assistant Secretary General of the Federation of Modern Languages and Literatures, FILLM, a UNESCO-affiliated scholarly association. Prof Sanfo is a pioneer fellow, senior scholar, mentor, and assessor of the African Humanities Program of the American Council of Learned Societies. She currently chairs the Interim Steering Committee of the African Humanities Association. She is also co-founder and the acting president of the African Pragmatics Association. Prof Amfo is a member of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences. Ladies and gentlemen, briefly a profile of our chairperson, Professor Nana Abba Apia Amfo. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Dan Ofori. We will now take brief remarks from the chair of the occasion, Professor Nana Abba Amfo, Vice Chancellor of the University of Ghana. Thank you. A round of applause for her, please.
Pro-Vice Chancellor with responsibility for academic and student affairs, Provost of the College of Humanities and other provosts who are here, Registrar, the fourth occupant of the Kwame Nkrumah Chair and the former Kwame Nkrumah Chairs. I see the first chair is here. Former Vice Chancellor and other former university officials here. Members of the Diplomatic Corps, the Managing Director and other officials of AngloGold Ashanti, family of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, faculty, staff, and students, distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. This afternoon, I am deeply honored to chair this all-important ceremony on the installation of Professor Amina Mama, the fourth occupant of the Kwame Nkrumah Chair in African Studies. This twofold program will also provide her the opportunity to deliver her inaugural lecture. The director referred to this as a delayed installation. It's better late than never. The University of Ghana is pleased to have such a distinguished scholar as the Kwame Nkrumah Chair. Already, we have witnessed the remarkable organization of the Kwame Nkrumah Intellectual Festival, hosted by the Institute of African Studies under her stewardship in October last year. This notable program, which has become part of the university's biennial calendar of events, brings together scholars to engage in the regeneration of Africa and her peoples through knowledge production, dissemination, and preservation. As a world-class university that thrives on excellent scholarship, we have always sought to involve the very best around the world in our endeavors. We are delighted that the Kwame Nkrumah Chair in African Studies, one of the 4 endowed academic chairs in the university, continues to live up to expectation, essentially because of the high recognition it enjoys internationally and the pedigree of scholars it has attracted. The Institute of African Studies is one of Africa's first reputable centers of African studies, founded in 1961 through the instrumentality of Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, our first president and a notable Pan-African who believed strongly in the abilities of the African. The University of Ghana therefore established the Kwame Nkrumah Chair in African Studies to honor Dr. Nkrumah for his significant intellectual contributions to African thought and for his vision and commitment to the liberation and development of Africans on the continent. The chair is also intended to enhance research, teaching, and promotion of African studies. Launched in 2007, the Kwame Nkrumah Chair in African Studies has introduced and spearheaded several important research and archival projects and conferences that have enhanced the image of the Institute of African Studies in particular and the University of Ghana as a whole. As has already been mentioned by Professor Georgie Chikata, Director of the Institute of African Studies, the activities of the chair since its establishment has been made possible by the generous and continued support of AngloGold Ashanti and a few individuals and institutions who continue to partner us to sustain the chair. We hope their support will endure as we make efforts to replenish the endowment fund. I seize this opportunity to call on other corporate entities to support the chair in its quest to promote research in African studies. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to an intellectually fulfilling afternoon, and I wish you all the same. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In the remarks by both Professor Georgie Chikata and the Vice Chancellor, mention was made of AngloGold Ashanti. AngloGold Ashanti is well represented here by Mr. Eric Esubontin, Managing Director. He has the opportunity now to make a few remarks, and it is my expectation that he will increase the funding for the chair. Mr. Esubontin.
Thank you very much. Madam Chairperson and the Vice Chancellor of the University of Ghana, the Pro-Vice Chancellor, the Provost, College of Humanities, the occupants of the Kwame Nkrumah Chair, cherished stakeholders of the Institute of African Studies, the media, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I bring you warm greetings and best wishes from AngloGold Ashanti. I am honored to be part of the installation ceremony of Professor Amina Mama, the fourth occupant of the Kwame Nkrumah Chair in African Studies. Our presence here demonstrates our respect for and devotion to Dr. Kwame Nkrumah's work, life, and memory, after whom this chair is named. It was a pleasure for AngloGold Ashanti to collaborate with the University of Ghana in 2009 to establish the Kwame Nkrumah Chair. We were here for the installation of Professor Horace Campbell, the third occupant of the Kwame Nkrumah Chair in African Studies in 2017, and I am particularly pleased to be present here today. Thankfully, despite the COVID-19 pandemic, we have been given the opportunity and the grace to witness this all-important installation ceremony. I want to recognize the organizers of today's ceremony, particularly the director of the Institute of African Studies, Professor Joji Chikata, and her team. I must remark that the three great scholars who have occupied the Kwame Nkrumah Chair since its inception have done an outstanding job. Thank you for your contributions during your tenure, Professor Kofi Anyidoho, Emeritus Professor Jacob Gordon, and Professor Horace Campbell. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I would want to touch briefly on the theme Nkrumah's Legacy, Feminism and the Next Generation. In July of 1960, the Conference of the Women of Africa and African Descent, a historic assembly of African women from the continent and the diaspora, convened in Accra, in Ghana, under the Convention's People's Party headed by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. This event was one of the many that helped to pave the way towards gender equality and feminism in Ghana and beyond. Under Dr. Kwame Nkrumah's leadership, women were at the forefront of the movement for national liberation in Ghana, then known as the Gold Coast prior to 1957. He supported and advocated for the full participation of women in the initial phases of organizing the United Gold Coast Convention and the Committee on Youth Organization. Nkrumah believed that the only way to ensure African unity was for women to utilize their feminine influence to persuade their brothers, husbands, and friends. In Dr. Nkrumah's own words, men alone cannot complete the gigantic task we have set ourselves. The time has come when women of Africa and African descent must rise in their millions to join the Africa Crusade for freedom. Since the fight for women's equality began centuries ago, one would have thought that we would now have a comprehensive and thorough understanding of the necessity of feminism, but that is not the case. It is indeed a shame that in 2022, we are still fighting for equal opportunities for women, socially, economically, and politically. Relating this to the industry I work in, according to a 2019 World Bank research, only an estimated 8 to 17% of the global mining workforce are women. This is nowhere near where it should be. However, companies around the world are starting to undo this legacy. The call to action is growing more substantial and beaming louder than ever before. There has never been a better opportunity to join forces and to build on Dr. Kwame Nkrumah's vision of a world where women are treated equally and play a vital role in the nation's social, economic, and political development. It was fascinating to learn from my research that Dr. Nkrumah's government made significant attempts to improve the status of women. In terms of work, the First Republic witnessed the end of pay discrimination against women, the implementation of paid maternity leave, and currently the chairperson of the board of directors of the global AngloGold Ashanti company is a woman by name Maria Ramos. In our Ghana operations, since the commencement of the Obuasi redevelopment project in 2018, we have consciously increased our intake of women from a meager 4% to the current 12% of our employees, including, in some cases, employing pregnant women. We acknowledge that 12% is still far from equal, but we must start from somewhere, and we have indeed started. At our last intake of graduate trainees, 8 out of the 10 trainees selected were female, that's 80%. We aim to make our graduate trainee program the best in the mining industry in Ghana. So you can imagine the products that we will be churning out in the years that lie ahead. I must say, though, that the mining industry is male-dominated, regardless of the geographical location. Achieving feminism and gender parity is therefore even more relevant to us than it has been or it is in other sectors. Even though considerable progress has been made for women in Africa in the last 50 years and more, much work remains to be done to fully recognize women's rights, health issues, and political and social participation. This is the ideal opportunity to preach on the hope, the potential women hold for Africa and beyond in terms of growth, inclusion, and social justice. This must be the message for the next generation, and AngloGold Ashanti is indeed honored to partner with the Institute of Africa Studies to promote Nkrumah's intellectual legacy as well as his agenda for continental unity through trade, culture, and technology. Finally, I take this opportunity to welcome the newly appointed 4th occupant of the Kwame Nkrumah Chair of the Institute of Africa Studies, Professor Amina Mama. I wish you every success during your tenure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eric Esubontin. For those of you who have the program for the day, you will notice that the next event is an interlude by the Ghana Dance Ensemble. And whilst they prepare to come, may I acknowledge the presence of our young minds and ladies from Accra Girls Secondary School or Senior High School. You are welcome. May I also take the opportunity to welcome our young minds from Presbyterian Boys Secondary School, Presec. You are welcome. And let me say that everybody here is important. Indeed, everybody here is a VIP. And I might not be able to mention everyone by name or position, but as we go along, few are extremely outstanding, and I would identify them for their achievements and their roles in promoting socio-economic development in their spheres of endeavor in the country. On that note, let me say we have here in our midst Professor Akila Kwasoya, one-time Vice Chancellor of this great university, Professor Kofi Anyidoho, the first occupant of the Kwame Nkrumah Chair, We have Professor Akosua Adomako Ampofu, former director of the Institute of African Studies. We have Professor A.C. Sutherland, professor at the Institute of African Studies, and many more that will be mentioned as we go along. Thank you. Ghana Dance Ensemble, we are ready for you.
Mama. Oh,
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. Such a beautiful and wonderful performance. Somehow, I just felt we should just be watching this for the rest of the day. But of course, there is a reason why we are here. And that is the installation of the fourth occupant of the Kwame Nkrumah Chair, Professor Amina Mama. You are welcome. Now, this performance is a praise poetry derived from African traditional settings, and is intended to celebrate the dexterity with which women perform their tasks. In this particular rendition, it is a praise for Professor Amina Mama for her competence, for her dexterity, qualities, and astuteness in the tasks she performs, and also to signal to us that indeed women have the capability and the capacity to venture into all terrains, including those that were hitherto considered as preserve of men. And so when you saw the women right here in front beating the drums, it is intended to signal to us that indeed we are on a new threshold of opportunities for all. Now, we are getting to the real meat of the program. And at this juncture, the fourth occupant of the Kwame Nkrumah Chair will be introduced. And that will be done by no less a person than the chair for this occasion and the Vice Chancellor of this great university of ours, Professor Nana Aba Amfo. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Agbesa White. That was indeed a brilliant and energetic performance by the women from the Ghana Dance Ensemble. Thank you very much. So it's now time for me to briefly introduce the fourth occupant of the Kwame Nkrumah Chair, and briefly means just a few pages. Professor Amina Mama is a transdisciplinary educator, researcher, organizer, and writer whose most influential works include Beyond the Mask, Race, Gender, and Subjectivity, Routledge, 1995, Engendering African Social Sciences, and Feminist Africa. She's a founding editor. She began her academic career as a community activist in London until her appointment as senior lecturer at the Institute of Social Studies in The Hague, returning to Nigeria to work with pro-democracy and women's movements. In 1999, she was appointed as the first chair in gender studies at University of Cape Town. She is currently a professor at the University of California and Kwame Nkrumah Chair in African Studies at the University of Ghana's Institute of African Studies. She worked on 2 documentary film projects, The Witches of Gambaga, she was a co-producer, and The Art of Amatedu. She was the executive producer, both produced by Fadoa Films. She has worked with a range of feminist movements and organizations and served on the boards of the United Nations Institute for Research Development, the United Nations Community for Development Policy, and the Global Fund for Women as board chair from 2001 till 2011. Professor Mama arrived in Ghana to start her tenure as the Nkrumah Chair in January 2021, at a time when COVID had visited. This made it difficult to organize an installation ceremony in her honor. Despite the challenges associated with restrictions of movement and holding of events occasioned by the pandemic, Professor Mama successfully organized a wholly digital festival, which was remarkable in terms of topics covered and innovations introduced in the course of the program, which combined plenary and panel presentation with amazing artistic performances and films. We are excited that the current circumstances are a bit more favorable, enabling us to organize this ceremony to install her as Nkrumah Chair. Soon after the official installation of Professor Mama as the fourth occupant of the Kwame Nkrumah Chair in African Studies, she would deliver an inaugural lecture on the topic Kwame Nkrumah's Legacy, Feminism, and the Next Generation. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, you agree with me that this is an interesting topic, and I have no doubt that the lecturer will elucidate cogent points that will stimulate conversations beyond the lecture. So at this point, we will do the installation, right? Or you have a performance crowd to that? Okay. All right. So the director will assist me to do the formal installation of the Kwame Nkrumah Chair. Thank you.
Eddie Kine, Eddie, and then I see you. I'm a train upon your coupon. I don't know what I want in the attention. To train upon your me with the moment I yank. Anyone they couldn't tell Shamwa. I saw your friend Institute of African Studies. I saw you put that Kwame Nkrumah. Come here, what's here, and can row. Mammy, and you, Baba. Zama Kotoko. Anna, this year, no one know what is our swear. I try to be some sore. I saw one ya and one hour. The monk when we are my quine. As you ask my away. Any pabe we all, Nana no some tears. And not the one we touch a man pronounce. And every tears of 4. Champagne for a kayak in a boom. Say a bet to us. Today I say. Ye kunini and intimate my baby in Nkrumah dear. You are what they kind of man when young for Professor Kofi Anido, Professor Gordon, Professor Campbell. Now say they are Pomabu, a yebo bisham. If you me as well, not panini more and your fear. The penny for Kaya Tripamo. I have been said. I was here, you will be our factor. Any baby, our one song, any baby, our one is what you know. Now, you know, one quadrille, and only here, no. And no money, I really, yeah. Obama, young for me. And much the much. I could hear someone, what I feel my probably acquired. And I'm sending Professor Amina Mama. Our toss 9. Only a panel. Oh, Papa, we are very proud of you. Congratulations. I'm not in call. Did you can say, oh, Papa, Ayuko, Emma with him crown. Ayuko, Professor, Ayuko, Yama money.
Professor Mama, on behalf of the university management, staff and students, I wish you a successful tenure as you officially take over the mantle as the 4th occupant of the Kwame Nkrumah Chair. So now at this point, I invite Professor Mama to give her inaugural lecture on the title Nkrumah's Legacy, Feminism and the Next Generation. Professor Mama.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome, and thank you for coming out despite the pandemic. I'm a little overwhelmed. I don't think I've ever been greeted and welcomed with such grace and such ceremony and such drumming. It's truly wonderful. And I'll try not to spend all my time saying thank you, thank you, thank you. Let me begin with the task at hand without more ado. And I'll begin by welcoming all my friends, colleagues, council members, IAS fellows, faculty, staff and students, all of you who make up the University of Ghana community, all the other protocols, some of which I may have missed, all dignitaries are very welcome. I'm especially happy to find young people here, school children. Anyone who has ever been a parent appreciates the value, the fact that every single one of you, born of woman, is a very special and important person. So a special welcome to the young people who have come today. Special welcome. I have to say, I'm especially honored to have been introduced by the first woman Vice-Chancellor, Dr. Nana Aba Appiah Amfo. And I really am, it's fortuitous. What happened? It seems very timely. It reminds me of my installation at the University of Cape Town, when Mampela Ramphele was the first black woman Vice-Chancellor, installed by Mandela himself. So these are auspicious times. I want you to recall that at moments of change, everything becomes possible. After almost 2 years of lockdown and isolation, many of us have been forced to live reduced, socially truncated digital lives, whether we liked it or not. Many of us were on the front of resisting digitalization because it can atomize, isolate, and scatter, and it can be destructive. But whether we like it or not, the pandemic forced all of us, gave us no more choice. If we were to be in touch, if we were to communicate, we would have to embrace these media, and not just embrace them critically and make them our own. That was the experiment that was referred to as this year's first digital festival. It was an attempt to Africanize and Pan-Africanize the latest technology, which has been used to oppress us, but to take it, turn it around, see, find out. It was an exploration, find out what we can do with it. And I'm really happy to see live the cultural performers, some of whom also participated in the festival. And I'll just say, they are better live. Everything is better live. But meanwhile, we have to make do sometimes. And there are advantages, which you will hear more about as I proceed. It's a very great, possibly the greatest honor, or at least for me, the most meaningful honor of my whole career, to have been appointed to this chair. It's daunting, somewhat intimidating at this leading university. So I want to just publicly thank and appreciate the hospitality that's been shown to me here. During difficult times, landing in the midst of a rising pandemic did make it difficult to have what I would consider normal collegial and social relations. We were all under lockdown. So, but despite all of those things, we've managed to do a few things. And that, the thanks go to Professor Georgie Chikata and her team, her loyal, committed, dedicated staff, without whom none of this would be happening today. So I want to especially appreciate them, because I haven't had time to meet and thank many of them in person, and I've been here a year, so it doesn't feel right. So I'm going to do it now and thank Dr. Atobra, Dr. Apianing, Dr. Hasiatu, Dr. Eric Lawe, and indeed all the people who joined in supporting the festival. Let me proceed. I think many of us feel, and I know I'm not alone in this, that we've reached a new and difficult historical conjuncture. It's another of those rare revelatory moments that open new possibilities new possibilities for pooling our resources to change the powerless situation of Africa's largely dispossessed populations. The last such moment arose in the post-war mid-20th century. For Africans, thousands of whom had been caught up in the deadly carnage of the wars, it was time to pursue decolonization. For the West, Europe's destruction shifted the center of power from Europe to the US, and the ideological division of Europe into a communist East and a capitalist West, creating the arms race and the Cold War. But for us, it was time to decolonize. No one should be surprised. I've heard people saying they're surprised about vaccine apartheid. Why? How can we be surprised if you know anything about the history of empire, the history of the world, and particularly the history of Africa? You should not be surprised. It would have been surprising if equity, the thing Nkrumah stood for, equality of the races, if equity had prevailed, I needn't be standing here today. The world would be a different place. But instead, there was hoarding, 5 to 10 times more than they could ever use. Meanwhile, the global economy contracted 3.1%, but arms industry giants were protected. And instead, in fact, military spending went up during a pandemic. How? Not health, military spending went up. The billionaire class doubled in size and multiplied its profits to attain ridiculous, obscene levels of wealth. That's what we call disaster capitalism, the profit on pandemics, on global crisis. And we, all of us here, are living witnesses to that. So global neoliberalism has reached new crisis-fueled, environmentally destructive, militarized extremes, while Africa remains as marginalized as ever, and still subjected to economic doctrines that patently are not working well for Africans. Our independent nation states, post-Nkrumah, have for the most part acquiesced to poorly negotiated inclusion in a global order, a global political economy that remains rigged. Yes, rigged. Its rules and regulations are stacked against disunited former colonies. For former colonies, the global free market is a space of extreme inequality and far from free. I'm not alone in this, and I'll call in my colleagues at Africa Development Journal and just quote the latest issue, which also sets the scene for today. They say, slide 1, slide 2. Can you read? Okay. The early post-independence era largely stands apart, in retrospect at least, as a time when policy and leadership was centered on the assertion and pursuit of political and economic agency from the hegemonic imperatives of the global north. The broad nationalist and emancipatory orientation that defined this period stands in contrast to the contemporary neoliberal era, which is characterized by a determined effort to reassert colonialist impulses, processes, and policies in African countries. Then they point to the transgenerational problem, which has already been mentioned here. And they describe this in terms of a hegemonic, that means domination with our consent. It's not a big word. Domination with our consent. The hegemonic narrative of failure around Africa. The deliberate attempt, they write of, to discredit the experience of the first 2 decades of post-independence development in Africa by casting it as unmitigated failure. The World Bank even proclaimed, I remember this, those post-independence decades, lost years. The narrative of failure was constructed in a manner that sought to question the foundational principles of autonomous and autochthonous development, which was the overarching framework for the policy choices that our post-independence political leaders made. So this depressingly hegemonic narrative of failure surely devalues everything that was achieved and attempted to bring an end to colonial rule and pursue the development interests and changes that African people wanted to see. It is, of course, a pacificatory narrative, one which propagates a sense of failure, likely to undermine confidence that there are, in fact, many alternatives to the neoliberal doctrine, which triumphantly declares, since Thatcher and Reagan, there is no alternative. Well, the alternatives exist. They are among us. They are all around us. We just have to adjust our value system a little. We have proud stories. The task of any intellectual, and I would say all people are intellectuals because we're the thinking animal, the task we face as intelligent beings is to demystify the workings of neoliberal ideologies that promote market over state, valorizing corporate profits over public good. This scenario requires sharp analytical capacities because for decades, prevailing doctrines have worked to suppress alternative narratives, denying and erasing proud histories, many her stories, and of course our stories, the stories of all Africans, the stories that all Africans of all classes can tell even now. Neoliberalism has compromised our capabilities for independent knowledge and cultural production, both at home and in the diaspora. And digitalization, as I said, initially accelerated the capture, trivialization, and commodification of the best of our intellectual and cultural resources. It's not just gold and diamonds. Nowadays, it's culture and ideas too. Cultural legacies that obscure, and it obscures powerful truths. So the global domination, the Western domination of knowledge, even just knowledge about Africa, is still a problem because it is not the knowledge that is relevant to the pursuit of change. It is not the knowledge that the agenda that we would set for ourselves if we wanted knowledge to be in the service of Africa's greater freedom and upliftment. The colonial archive buries, freezes, and simplifies complex, rich, and deep histories and narratives, particularly those of struggle, stereotyping and simplifying them. So the colonial archive is largely irrelevant to the project of African survival, let alone our autonomy and our freedom. More than half a century ago, there's a very popular quote from Frantz Fanon, who stated once that every generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its destiny and decide to betray or fulfill it. More than half a century later, must every generation still come out of relative obscurity, as was the case in the colonial era? Can we not build on the knowledge and experiences accumulated through the decades of struggle and resistance, the many strategies that have been tried? More than ever, Africans need to build on the lessons of the recent past and develop this legacy from one generation to the next for the generations yet to be born. Now that we are all citizens of our nations, we have governments and an African Union that we can call to account and pressurize, because we cannot afford to leave each generation to flounder and begin again without knowledge of what was achieved and indeed what was lost, so that we can now again pursue from a position of strength and information, pursue African visions of what Africa can yet become. Transformations require change on all fronts. And one of the things Nkrumah so clearly does is understand that politics, culture, and economy are linked. They produce each other. Even the economy or the economic doctrine of the day is a product of a particular culture and history. And as Africans, we know that that is a product of the history of empire. Neoliberal dogma, if it was our history, it might look very different. We would not be promoting the same thing. Africans' women's movements have specialized in critique because they have found out that whenever they push for basic rights or economic access, the powers that be, so push for economy, push for rights, culture, our tradition is invoked, often by men, to block change and to justify outmoded customs that do harm. This foible has forced feminists to think very critically about culture. Who has the right to define our culture? Who has the right to say what culture should become? We are all producers of culture, and more importantly, and I'll say especially women, transmitters of culture. So we have made significant developments in cultural theory, and heady outpourings of creativity has been inspired by women's will to freedom. And it's all out there, one just has to look for it and find it. And you will find things far more radical than I'm saying in the feminist cultural output, just as we do among younger generation cultural activists. So today I'm going to just basically argue that we cannot afford to allow each generation to remain in that relative obscurity. Instead, what we have to do is develop a Pan-African bridging practice that is alert to the fragmenting, isolating mechanisms of today's neoliberal hegemony, which nurtures, and a praxis which nurtures and renews intellectual and political community among Africans, cultivating a shared sense of destiny and possibility. So I'll begin with my next section moves into a short discussion. His work is voluminous. I've done the best I can, drawing on half a dozen books for this lecture. I encourage everyone to study Nkrumah. I don't know how I left him. Somehow I lost 20 years of not reading him between when I first read him and this opportunity. But I'll try and be brief, partly because I expect many of you to be better informed than I. I do not having been part of Ghana's revolutionary movements, I don't have direct observations or anecdotes or memories or local affiliations to add to those of all the Nkrumahs here in Ghana. Instead, I humbly approach Nkrumah as a mere scholar, albeit one with a personal interest in Pan-Africanism that dates way back. In light of the vast reach of his visionary thought, I will just talk briefly about his core ideas, then his gender politics, and then I will talk a bit about the festival and what happens when we gather together Pan-African feminist thinkers, activists, cultural producers to see what they've done with Nkrumah's legacy. That's the last section. I call it Nkrumah's Afterlives. So, start by saying that Nkrumah's was a coherent unity of thought. He spanned psychology, philosophy, politics, economics, culture, and education. Concerned both about Africans' relations to the world, he was also particularly concerned about African relations to one another, and his principle was one of the equality of all humans. I think most of what he stood for can be traced back to that. Remember, he was grown up in a colonially divided, tribalized, hierarchical society. Clearly, he had a very human reaction against that. For his generation, national liberation began with the political struggle to oust the colonial regime and win political power. That meant take over the state apparatus and use power of sovereignty to pursue decolonization of the economy and then to completely reorganize it for the benefit of African people. At that time, it seemed feasible. Slide. This was the time, the moment of political liberation. Can you see it? I can't see it. Okay. The whole continent, this is Nkrumah, the whole continent is ablaze with the fire of nationalism. This great giant, Africa, which was anesthetized for so long, is now awake, has shaken itself out of the slumber that for so many years enabled exploiters and marauders to plunder its wealth. The new African has arrived on the scene. Colonialism and imperialism are on the run, fleeing from the blows of African irredentism. It's the difference between then and now. Taking over the state, however, was not just power for its own sake, it was a means to an end. And in his writings, he shares the story of that succession and his many plans to grow a Ghanaian national economy and the efforts to sabotage it, which people here know included 7 assassination attempts before his eventual ousting in a CIA-backed coup. As he noted, slide, once freedom is gained, a greater task comes into view. All dependent territories are backward in education, agriculture, and industry. And the economic independence that should follow and maintain political independence demands every effort from people. Total mobilization of brain and manpower resources. What other countries have taken 300 years or more to achieve, a once dependent territory must try to accomplish in one generation if it is to survive. Well, we're several generations past, and clearly powerful forces had other ideas. Fearing loss of access to the enormous wealth they were accustomed to extracting for very little, they also viewed all African liberation movements through their own ideological spectacles. Locked as they were in a bipolar ideological contestation of the Cold War, the West saw all national liberation movements not in terms of their declared desire for self-rule and decolonization, but rather as a threat to their interests. Determined to retain control, the colonial powers branded pretty much all of those who resisted as communists, treating African revolutionaries as if they were mere proxies for the Soviet Union and China. Their preventative actions included supporting the apartheid regime in South Africa, sponsoring counterinsurgencies that intensified violence inflicted on the national liberation movements, prolonging them into the 90s, and of course massive propaganda campaigns. Later in life, possibly because of all this and the number of coups d'etats that were occurring, and particularly in West Africa, and the militarization of South Africa, he changed from a Gandhian, peaceful philosophy of action, positive action, into supporting. He eventually became convinced that decolonization would require armed struggle. And you'll find that in Dark Days in Ghana and, of course, revolutionary warfare. You have to understand what drove him there. That's what I'm saying. So once the political kingdom, his ideas and the economy, I've sketched, but particularly the issue of Ghana's decolonization. The government he led faced huge challenges arising from the fact that pretty much everything was still foreign owned. And the whole economy was oriented towards extraction, founded on centuries of labor exploitation and through enslavement, indentureship, and colonial rule, within a global international division of labor that would fix it there, and indeed has somewhat been able to fix it in some ways. That international division of labor, I'll add to Nkrumah here, was also gendered. It devalued African women's work more than men's. In fact, it recruited men and left women to the informal, impoverished lower echelons, unsupported, to fend for themselves and feed their families. An internally integrated and people-centered economy was to be built and owned by Ghanaians. This he saw as the way to end the exploitation of labor by using technology and industrial development to ensure more efficient production. These days, nobody needs to drudge, really. We have so much. He saw this as an imperative to prevent what? Recolonization by other means. And here we move on to his most elaborate text, really. It's his last book, I believe. And Neocolonialism is a must-read. You think you're reading about today. It's shocking to reread it. I quote, slide up there. If Africa's, this is Nkrumah again, how he saw it. If Africa's multiple resources were used for her own development, they would place her among the modernized continents of the world. But her resources have been and are still being used for the greater development of overseas interests. So his efforts to put anti-colonial ideas into practice pitted him against private financial interests of transnational corporations, commanded by what he describes as a powerful international confraternity, which was very secretive. His protagonists were such, the force of his protagonists, and he names them. He does detailed studies, empirical material on who did what. He became convinced, as a result, that only by uniting could Africa hope to get itself out, because these forces were networked all over the world. Between the Caribbean and Africa and America and Europe, they had all the lanes, shipping lanes, controlled. So, for Africans to be free, not only must we unite, we must disengage. We must produce what we consume and consume what we produce. So this is his commitment to self-sufficiency as a necessity for independent development and indeed economic sovereignty. It means changing the desires embodied in the colonized person's self-alienating preference for all things foreign. Well, secondly, he saw it as the state's responsibility. Imperialism, slide. Imperialism, no, okay, never mind. Quickly adapted to the outlook, its outlook to the loss of political control. And then he talks about the artfulness of neocolonial insinuation and the acrid details of some of his desperate efforts to negotiate economic decolonization have been written about by subsequent investigators, notably Professor Sawyer and Professor Graham, Dr. Graham, seated here. I hope you will be able to embellish on or confirm or disfirm. The grand vision was epitomized in a huge project, the Volta River Project, which the CPP massively invested in. The story is a disturbing example of the complexity of the maneuvers he was up against, which I can't detail here. He lays out his encounters with powerful corporations and among them, the Oppenheimer Empire, AngloGold, Anglo-American Corporation, and all the groups extracting diamonds, gold, tin, aluminium, diamonds, etc. He details the mechanisms, and the main transition between old colonialism and neo is the increased use of knowledge, right? Intelligence, ideological propaganda, and mass media, mass entertainment. These are the more artful insinuations. And if you're not equipped with a knowledge of where you came from and your history, you don't have a filter to understand exactly what's going on when the tirade of media, particularly digital media, comes at you through your thinking. You've got a private device. So the barrage is serious, and the strongest minds have difficulty with it. Okay, but yet that is what we have to do. We have to increase our critical capabilities if we wish to get a hold, if we wish to demystify and then make change to how things are working. Okay, education, yes, okay. I won't detail it, I'm going to emphasize it because for him it was the transgenerational thing. To survive, the regime had to create urgently, remember, one generation, not 300 years, train, train, train. And he set up all manner of transgenerational projects. The first thing was free schooling, absolutely essential to build a capacitated nation. Some thought it was instrumental. Certainly it was goal-oriented. It was not liberal education for the sake of it or for the fun of it. It was indeed directed to grooming a cadre of people who would carry on the decolonization work that he began. And there are various policies I'm going to skip because you can all find them. Accelerated Educational Development Plan. In the formal system, it was about massive inclusion, including girls. Co-educational schools made it quicker to get girls in, even though not everyone approved of co-education. But beyond the schooling system, which I think is important, there were also numerous clubs and women's clubs dating back some time. He formed the Young Pioneers movement in 1960. And looking at the figures, it set out to educate and train the youth to eradicate the colonial mentality and equip them with skills, I quote. By 1962, they had 5,000 branches and 500,000 members, of which 38% were women. By 1963, 1 million members. Criticism came first from the churches, who condemned them for blasphemy and godlessness, according to Amabaini. Social conservatives objected to the non-traditional mixing of boys and girls in co-educational schools and training camps, and were also opposed by African traditions. So there was all this pushback going on at the same time as he was trying to push forward with enormous energy. There was also an ideological institute, study groups, and numerous interventions designed to change people, to make the new people who would push forward a genuinely post-colonial agenda. And he was more of a political philosopher than a cultural theorist, but he was very concerned to purge that colonial mentality of all its trappings, including the versions of African customary law that they inscribed. And he envisaged African culture not in terms of just restoring past traditions, but rather as a new synergy that would build on the combined legacies, albeit be grounded in African cultural legacies. And he had particular ideas about what African society was, communal in instinct, he thought, and the African personality. This was both a psychological shift among Africans, but it was also a collective personality that he intended for Africans to project on the world scale as equals in a community of equal nations. Of course, I need to mention the Institute of African Studies, because it was one of his initiatives, and he tasked it with pursuing a pan-African knowledge agenda that would conduct research and generate decolonized knowledge. That is, knowledge grounded in Africa's vast cultural and intellectual legacies. At last, he thought, Africa would become the hub of African knowledge production. How are we in the 21st century and we do not control our own knowledge production? We have to look for funds, and then we have to publish in journals that our people cannot access because they're behind corporate paywalls. Something's gone very wrong here, very wrong. About the Institute, the moment of its formation, it was considered to be the vanguard of a Pan-African movement to reimagine, reinvent how knowledge about Africa was produced and interpreted. There was basis for that optimism. Nowadays, the generation might be too cynical to believe anyone could believe that. This is part of the problem. It was at least possible at that moment to imagine forms of knowledge production about Africa that challenged colonial categories and conventions of academic disciplines, that was Africa-centered, Africa-based, and globally engaged, that sought to transcend the politics of the Cold War and defy the hegemonic impulse of the US racial politics. That is a quote from Jean Allman. I want to say that we are, by the way, Jean, still imagining forms of knowledge production and challenging colonial categories. So we are still imagining. It's just that those things are not in command, those radical ideas, but they are everywhere. And this imagination informed the Institute at its inception. You've already heard, so I can cut the introduction of the festival and why that was important. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But the overall thing was that African universities were envisaged as the rightful hub of African knowledge production, and they should serve African agendas. Academic freedom, the colonialists cried. So it was a struggle. African knowledge was to be turned around to serve the interests of African people, as was the state, as was our politics, as was our economics and our education systems. This is a particular kind of unity. It's a visionary unity. His political philosophy is laid out in his most academic book, Conscientism, Philosophy and Ideology for the Decolonization and Development of with particular reference to the African Revolution. He begins with a complete review of Western philosophy. He knew his philosophy before he lays out his argument. So it's I will make only two observations for my own purposes. One is he rejected the ivory tower model of the university and insisted that philosophy shouldn't be something esoteric up there in the stratosphere looking pretty like something irrelevant and beautiful, but it should be deeply relevant to social life. And the quote there tells it all. And that is what we mean by praxis. Thought and action, like culture and economy, reproduce each other. They work together in synergy. So we have a serious task to cultivate new synergies. The second thing I want to mention at this point is that he regarded African society as egalitarian, fundamentally egalitarian and communal, and therefore more compatible with socialism and the socialization of production and the economy, in contrast to the possessive individualism at the heart of capitalist society, which celebrates the individual in a very particular way, that's very market-oriented. Okay, and there have been many debates about his cultural philosophy, which I'll skip over, just to say that even the best discourse is vulnerable to appropriation. So you had different iterations that focused on Senghor, for example, négritude, Mobutu's authenticité. These were discourses that stood on racial nationalism, but they never mentioned decolonizing the economy or taking owner of it. So that's what I mean by ideas that float. There has to be an economic accompaniment to make those things real, to give them traction and make it happen. So his gender politics. To discuss Nkrumah and feminism is not, as some have thought, to make any spurious claim. I'm not implying that the man was himself a feminist. There is plenty of anecdotal and biographical evidence that, at least at a personal level, he was not. That's irrelevant. What matters is the legacy and how it lives on and how it is carried forward. And modern African feminism, slide, has come into being since the 70s and 80s, so post-Nkrumah. So we can't expect him to have a discourse from a future he had not yet. Yeah, okay, I think the point is clear. The first research network to challenge the dominant development paradigms was only created, that's the Association of Women of Africa for Research and Development. In 1789, they articulated the gender critique of imperialism and colonial development and modernization. Because of the way they left women out. Only men worked in factories. Europeans saw farmers as men, etc. So today we have very widely dispersed feminist movements across the regions, as well as many Pan-African organizations and networks. African feminism itself is born of anti-imperialism and has developed almost on a parallel track, developed powerful theories, analytic tools, and methods that help demystify the historical particularities of African marginalization, and within that, the marginalization of African women. These things work together. Cadre after cadre of feminist intellectuals have created new fields of study. We're talking about 40 years now, new pedagogies, new curriculums, new research fields, publications, in order to ensure that the teaching of gender in Africa used African materials against the charge of everything critical being foreign. So today there are about 40 gender studies units in the continent. At the end of this month, Makerere, the School of Gender and Women's Studies, is celebrating its 30th anniversary. So many of us are not familiar with the scope and depth of feminist work because it's... why isn't everybody familiar with it? Well, feminists don't center on men, so it can lead men to feel disinterested. Yet, African unity requires the bringing together of all radical energies. He writes with a male voice. He writes in a conventional way, but I think we can say from his principle of the equality of humans and races that he did not think women were inferior to men. So deducing from that principle, we can take it that all African people, and even if he said men, he meant to include women, as we saw from some of the other actions that were mentioned earlier, and I will say a bit more. We know he loved his mother and respected her deeply, but I suspect that it is other influences that shifted his gender politics as well. We may recall that he was very impressed by the Garveyites, the biggest black movement ever, which he ran into in the States. And in the 1930s, he was in touch with Black International Socialists and the Pan-Africanist movement, and his associates and close fellow travelers, who came, many of them, to Ghana, W.E.B. Du Bois, Caribbean radicals like C.L.R. James, James Padmore, and I'm going to add, for your benefit, black left feminist Amy Ashwood Garvey. It turns out that Nkrumah spent a fair amount of time with Amy Ashwood in London during the 1930s, and she co-organized with W.E.B. Du Bois that famous 1945 Manchester Pan-African Congress. What was her attraction to Africa? I don't have time to share the whole story, but let's just say that in the colonial Jamaica of her early childhood, her grandmother told her stories, and her grandmother's name was Boahema, who spoke of Juaben. Later, the story completes itself. But at 17 years, as C.L.R. James described her, his friend, almost a schoolgirl, co-founded the Universal Negro Improvement Association in Kingston, Jamaica. C.L.R. James wrote that in 1938. So this is not just a feminist celebration. C.L.R. James saw it. Anyway, so in London, after her divorce from Marcus, who married another Amy, she became very active in London in the anti-imperialist movement, in the campaigns against the Ethiopian invasion, and the International Friends of Ethiopia, and she founded the Florence Mill Social Parlour and International Afro Restaurant, which became the meeting place for all the African and Caribbean radical thinkers. They used to meet there, and it also served as a venue with, for the planning of the 1945 Congress. It was discussed around her table. So, just to say that I think that his encounters with other women colleagues and comrades likely informed him, just as it informed him about his Pan-Africanism, which originated in the diaspora and came home with Nkrumah. Okay, next slides. Oh, that's Amy Ashwood's Center. Next slide. That's part of her Entertaining Africa's Future Leaders. Those of you who know will spot who's in there. Next. Claudia Jones also lived in London, close friends with Amy Garvey. I don't know if they met. Next. And there's Amy Ashwood at the chairing the opening session of the 5th Pan-African Congress in Manchester. Okay, you can move on. Yes, she eventually made it home, found her relatives, and they accepted her. She learned from Casely Hayford that Juaben actually existed. And one of those rare, real stories where she traced to her grandmother's place. Next. Coming back to Ghana. Next. There are other Victorian feminists. Next. Coming back to Ghana. We all know this is well known and has been well detailed already by great scholars such as Tetua Menu and Professor Georgie Chikata. They've done the necessary work to recuperate this, but we need more. He was well supported, and this led him to appoint women at various levels in his government. He passed the Representation of Women Members Act to make provision for women's seats in the parliament, so that the first parliament of Ghana had 10 women parliamentarians in it, and several other women were appointed as district commissioners, a deputy minister, and so on. Read the articles by Menu and Chikata for the detail. It was quite remarkable for the time. It placed Ghana ahead of Canada and the US, for example. It placed Ghana in some ways ahead of today, because now we're 108 in the world tables for political representation. I'm not trying to shame on anybody. In fact, I'll say my own country, Nigeria, is at the bottom of Africa, even below Ghana and Algeria. What's happening, guys? What is going on? Okay, not everyone. Slide. All he did to recognize the support that women gave him, this conference was already mentioned. He opened it, and gave an opening address in which he recognized strongly women's part in the great struggle for liberation. And he commends the women's role in the past and insists that they do use whatever they have to continue to support the fight for freedom. However, not everyone was in favor of his position on women. Slide. Next. Okay, these are slides of some of the women activists and mass mobilizers who, Hannah Kudjo, there's an article about how she got disappeared simply through conventional journalistic and archiving practices. There's very little record of her history. I've written biography pending. Next. There's another, Susan Al-Hassan. You will know these people better than I. Next. So I'm not even showing you a list. I'm going to show you this from the biography I came across of Tawia Adamafio, who was at one time the General Secretary of the party, Secretary General, and clearly close. He was given the task of organizing the women, and he was not happy at all. Read this. He was pretty appalled at the task. The party women could not be bullied into submission by any party leader. It was if necessary, they did not hesitate to boo me or any other leader for that matter and cause severe embarrassment. No, I cannot convey, I feel for him, I cannot adequately convey to you the expression of the actual difficulty involved in organizing women. But if you could imagine their gossip, bitter quarrels and bickering and the acrimony of their lashing tongues, you would be getting nearer than the truth than I could describe. I did not cherish this new task at all. Next slide. You feel pity for him, eh? Don't. According to his account, male members of the party and the trade union movement agreed with him, and they feared a situation in which the National Council of Ghana Women would grow so monolithic and powerful that the party could lose control of it. Leadership bristling with dynamic women intellectuals and revolutionaries, the organization had become conscious of its strength. It could break off in rebellion, form a party by itself, and sweep everything. This gives you an idea of the political power women had. The ratio of women voters to men was about 3 to 1. So his fear, we might laugh at it, but it's actually a serious fear. If only women, you see where I'm going? Okay, Ghana could be ruled by a woman president. This is a nightmare for him. And an all-woman cabinet, and the principal secretaries were all women, and men could be relegated to the back room. It could be disastrous for Ghana. I could see men being ridden like horses. A male tyrant could be twisted round a woman's little finger. An Amazonian tyrant could probably only be subdued by a battery of artillery. We might be amused were it not for the fact that such views are still also alive among us. So, he was ahead, but he was not alone by any means. All the revolutionary leaders embraced the emancipation of women and saw it as necessary to economic liberation. And C.L.R. James said, one market woman was worth any dozen Achimota College graduates. That's a class comment. It was the working women who really carried him to power, not the professors, not us. Shame. Nkrumah was among the African revolutionaries who saw that economic and social transformation would require all the people to be mobilized, including women. So I would say it was principle rather than pragmatism. We've had many pragmatists in power, some of them mere soldiers, declaring women this, women that, women the other. Don't be fooled. It's a very different inclusion of women that is being spoken of here. There isn't any evidence, sadly, that he planned to change the unequal gender division of labor. We heard about the mining sector. It's still the same. And this, of course, is central to 1970s left and socialist feminist analysis. The international division of labor is a gendered division of labor in situ and globally. So as I mentioned earlier, those critiques developed, and these are part of the afterlife. They developed after Nkrumah, but they started from a position of equality, from anti-imperialism. On that basis, I suggest they are the afterlife of Nkrumah, even in feminist mouths, because they're carrying his best ideas forward and advancing them on the basis of what? Empirical, social scientific analysis of the data, for the most part. Okay, education, we've seen already. I think I'll say no more, except I will go to the University of Ghana and I will quote my learned colleague, Professor Georgie Chikata here, who carried out a detailed study of gender culture, gender and institutional culture of the University of Ghana. And because we're here, we will take a minute to see what her research found. Of course, Ghana was ahead. It never excluded women, unlike, may I say, Oxford and Cambridge, that excluded women for decades. Ghana never did. The University of Ghana always accepted women, but there's a gender hierarchy that can be observed, and it was there, and it's improved slowly. the low numbers have improved slowly. Next slide. And there's still, this is in 2007, it's published in Feminist Africa. Anyone from this university who wants to see it, it's there online. The professorial class had 18.5% females in the 1960s, none in the 70s, I wonder why. 7.9 in the 90s, and today, about 60% of women academics are lecturers as opposed to less than 50% of men, and only about 5% of women academics are professors. 5%, as compared to double, 10% men. Women are still concentrated in lower ranks. Well, I think we are seeing more change right now, are we not? This, I think the university is as good as it's ever been in terms of more women in senior administrative positions. And I think it is safe to say that Kwame Nkrumah himself would have welcomed our Vice-Chancellor's appointment and the changes that have happened in the last couple of years. He may, of course, wonder what took us so long. Okay, his Pan-Africanism, I'm going to skip over it, except to say it was initially diasporan, heavily anti-racist, and it pertained both to Africa in the world, to be projected through the African personality, and at home it was all about how Africans would relate to each other, what kind of economy, what kind of culture, what kind of education. So the last section is on afterlives. Excuse me for time. And it offers us, the concept offers us a way of discerning continuities between his ideas and present-day political and intellectual struggles. So to suggest that he has an afterlife is not that I believe in ghosts, no. It is to say that despite attempts to systematically erase and suppress his writings, they still find life. Why do they still find life? I don't think it's magic. I think it is because Africa's systemic, historical, and material condition, there are continuities between 60 years ago and now that we would do well to pay attention to. These continuities link the fate of one African generation to the next. An afterlife, therefore, refers to the persistence of ideas that emerge out of that legacy. Neocolonialism is the continuation of colonialism. Can I suggest that the euphemism neoliberal is actually a deeply illiberal ideological doctrine of market fundamentalism that declares no alternative, yet the truth is there are myriad, infinite possibilities, and some of them are alive. How do we find them out? Africans must tell their own truths. We must unleash the myriad stories that lurk beneath the surface, enabling us to share and make meaning, and indeed to imagine alternatives. In fact, alternatives we discovered, and I was reminded at the festival, live among us, are being imagined and put into practice every day. And there's nowhere more profligate with new ideas than the younger generation. They find life inhabiting the fringes of our reformed and increasingly privatized education system. The global marketization that we nowadays confront, the marketization of everything, includes the commodification and capture of African knowledge, cultural products within corporate circuits of value, which can actually alienate us from our own writing, our own production. African knowledge cannot profit Africans when it has been captured to earn profits for publishing corporations elsewhere. So this is why we need a strong cultural economy to allow for production and circulation within this vast region where African genius may not be God-given, but it lurks and resides and can be developed, can be lifted, can be corralled and conveyed. And festivals, film festivals, book clubs, book festivals, there are many sites at which these things are ongoing. Africans have been very quick, and I'm going to move to an end because I see I've gone over time. Africans have been very quick, and I refer to Pambazuka News 2000. This was a Pan-African digital news service aiming to sidestep the global corporate news media. I won't ask how many people here read it, or read it in its heyday. But at the festival, we bought several publishers when we agreed with the director to do a digital festival. I won't go into my questioning. When do a festival in the midst of a pandemic, it took about 2 minutes for us to agree, okay, we can do it digitally. And it only happened actually because of the interest the idea attracted. It may not have happened had the first 20, 30 friends or colleagues I sent a note to not responded with such incredible energy. And I realized that it wasn't only me that was traumatized and atomized and locked down and oppressed by COVID. Actually, there was a much broader hunger to meet, to regroup, to reflect on the trauma of what has happened even this last 2 years. Just to get together can be a relief. So the response was such, and then the Feminist Africa Partnership meant that we were able to draw funds from African feminists. I don't know if you know, feminists have set up their own funding organizations to fund their movements. So we drew support from AWDF and the Urgent Action Fund, which is a feminist emergency response fund, because they saw the urgency of having a gathering at this particular time. Trust Africa, Africans Rising, other movements quickly were drawn to the festival, and that is what made it happen. Popular support, all the best things happened that way. So the festival was mentioned under the title, and I'm saying that in the festival we were able to explore. It was the first time we actually brought movements that seem to have a bit of parallel evolution. It's the Pan-Africanist movement, and there's the things, or the different things women have done within the Pan-African Congress. But that's the Pan-African movement. And the feminist movement has been very insistent on its autonomy. And as a result, it's had a massive development and something of a sense of disconnect. So bringing them together and wrestling with the economic nature of culture and the cultural nature of the economy was the objective. And it was, well, it's there. It's been archived, so, but as I said, it's just a copy. The digital archive is there, open access, so it can continue to be used. When I was organizing, I couldn't find reports. I had never done a festival before. I couldn't find any trail to follow, so I looked for Professor Sutherland's Panafest and did what I could. But I'm saying there are lots of these traces around, and it suggests huge activity. At the festival, we were reminded that there is a substantial corpus of African and feminist culture and knowledge being continuously produced. And the brilliance of Africa's political intellectual community left us in no doubt. We learned from colleagues in the US about the Black radical tradition, there's a Black Caribbean tradition, and of course here we have to just sort of corral it and name it the African intellectual tradition, or Pan-African radical thought, to give it an identity that enables us to project it. Because this is the body of knowledge that reveals the truths of the African world to us on the continent itself. And surely the hub of African knowledge production formally should be on African soil, but I will suggest that informally, of course it's on African soil. All anyone else can do is harvest and appropriate. It grows here. We feed it. It will grow more and more. So the next generation must have their visions of the future, and I do not think they should grow out of obscurity. The youth know this. Next slide. The Youth Festival, next slide. No progress. Covered. Next slide. Oh, that's the festival reach. 6,500 people, lots of countries. 102 countries, 48 of them in Africa, signed into the festival. But here is Elizabeth Sutherland, who performed at the Youth Festival, who describes how hard it is to be a creative because of the everyday hustle for survival. And if some of our most creative children are the majority of Africans and they don't have any resources to support that creativity, what happens? It dies, and it dies, and it dies, and there's wastage of talent, wastage of genius. Next slide. They also know this. With every decision, we are all connected to building the future, whether we're doing it consciously or not. People need to balance that responsibility. We have a responsibility to do better for ourselves and for the future. We should think about what we are doing as a community. What kind of world are we building? What kind of standards are we setting? We can totally move beyond survival into thriving, and it's totally possible if we change the way we look at things and are willing to change. Creativity requires time, resources, connectivity. Concretely, she said, art cannot be perfected by bodies exhausted from working in bars and restaurants and then turning up for rehearsal. It can't work. Same with scholarship. To thrive, art, science, and culture all require economic and infrastructural support and the freedom to explore and experiment and to make mistakes. This is the cultural economy that we need to build. It does not exist barely from what young people are saying. It is thin. It's not supporting the emergence of something that is not God-given. African genius must be grown, nurtured, cultivated. It's not to take anything away from God, it's just to say that there is work to be done here to make it real. So the regular festivals are just one, and I'm sure all three were, the other two were equally wonderful, and I hope that we can institutionalize this so that it moves forward from one edition to the next, albeit in completely different ways. Each one should be very different, and I could begin to imagine, but it's not my place to do so. Within the festival, there were too many things, 10 days, it's all there. I want to mention what publishers were doing, because they were asked to talk about the challenges facing Pan-African publishing in the digital era. Next slide. We had, in a sense, 3 publishers. The most powerful storyteller of all is this South African sister, Keynote, who reminded us all in an amazing performance about the power and value of telling and sharing stories. But this is what publishers do. It's fiction and non-fiction. The first of them was Cassava Republic, founded by Bibi Bakare Yusuf in 2006. Next slide. This is the panel. Bibi Bakare Yusuf. Next. And here is Bibi. The second was Daraja Press. I'll come to it. And this is the vision. The time has come to build a new body of African writing that links writers and readers from Benin to Bahia. It is therefore the right time to ask challenging questions of African writing. Where have we come from? Where are we now? And where are we going? Our role is to facilitate and participate in addressing these questions as our list grows. We are just beginning. And she founded that in 2006. The next slide goes that most writers were always seen as men, especially Heinemann Africa, reproduced the exclusion of women. But nowadays, there's a huge surge of African women's writing, and I'm quite sure publishers like Margaret Busby and Bibi have had a lot to do with the change that we're seeing. Thank you. So, and her comment, setting it up is a political act in a context where publishing is owned by giant Western publishing machinery, and they publish about Africa. Africa is mediated. Even now, this is her talking just a couple of months ago. She felt it was important that we own the means of production. If you want to produce your own knowledge, you better own your means of production. Otherwise, you're working for Taylor Windrush and Rutledge. And that's what you have to do if you want to get promoted. Do you see how we're trapped, all of us, in these circuits? Yeah, I'm talking, but I'm trapped in them too. The article I published 5 years ago in Feminist Review, I can't access. Okay, Daraja Press, the last example. And I wish you could hear, go there and hear the strategies they've tried. Downloading PDFs, community book production by sending activists to work with the community so that it's not just elite. Printing online. Essentially, they have to cultivate a market to make their enterprise viable. So they're talking about a community of subscribers. Bibi gave an example of getting a book forward funded by an interested African audience. 1,000 people bought it before she could even print it. So they're really trying lots and lots of exciting strategies I don't have time to go into. But they have searched, and the last thing that I will quote from Bibi is that she returns to the point of the needing for building forward. The notion of creating the archival future, and the idea of an archival future is that basically, not everyone should have to reinvent the publishing business again and again, but stand on each other and learn, especially with the rapid pace of development and technological shift. I needn't talk about Feminist Africa. It is now in the hands of the Institute of African Studies, and it has been mentioned. I mentioned it in my notes because it was also, alongside Pambazuka, conceptualized just as digitalization was coming, to say that I was young then. We were on the front edge of whatever is going on in the most advanced technological place on earth. I think as penance, I've served time next to Silicon Valley. It's made me more alarmed, not less. Okay, so I'm going to end now by just remembering the importance of telling African stories. You can go ahead with the slides. You can find this online. But what story? Let me close by asking us to return to Nkrumah and say, what would he tell of today's anti-imperialist struggles against the colonialities of our time, or our reluctance to confront questions of domination by consent, hegemony? Would he not advise us to do what we can to demystify and expose just the mechanics of how these circuits of production and power work and perpetuate Africa's marginalization? Parading as an all-inclusive ideology, neoliberalism has the vast institutional capacity to absorb, appropriate, include, neutralize its critics, to hire its opponents as consultants. The effect of such inclusion, this is not the inclusion Nkrumah meant, This inclusivity will nullify dreams of freedom, trivialize and commodify the very idea of freedom, kill off the afterlives of which I speak. Today's coloniality works through the manufacture of consent, the commodification of ideas, dreams, yes, and even your deepest desires. Would Nkrumah run the women's movement the way he did, corral it under one roof? We don't know. We can never know. But what we can know is that there were many very good things that happened. And in the 21st century, we must work with our present conditions. There is an incredible corpus of African radical thinking and creative work out there. This can help us, and as we continue to produce and put things into practice, to leverage us forward and, for goodness sake, lift us out of that relative obscurity that Fanon wrote about. So I think the examples I've given in the time available are sufficient to demonstrate that Nkrumah's legacy lives on. It lives on in the thoughts and actions of many of us as Africans and diasporans. His audacious efforts may have been interrupted and suppressed, but his legacy has not been eradicated. As imperialism has undergone rapid evolution and outpaced Africa's revolution by many accounts, so too must we advance from one generation to the next. The global African community has to develop bridges, transmission systems, conveyor belts, connections in the areas of knowledge and culture and the economy, if we are to bridge generations and connect communities. We owe it to one another to retrieve our individual and collective selves from the alienation and fragmentation, and simply to share our stories. The young are already imagining and creating new and different worlds, inhabiting digital circuits and changing meaning and value through cell phones. Can we take ownership of our businesses, our economies, our cultural production? Can we reshape our consumer desires and appetites to build up a Pan-African cultural economy with the infrastructure and resources to unlock Africa's talents and direct them to our purposes? The present situation calls for much more of this, much more transgenerational collaboration, much more transnational, Pan-African collaboration across social strata, including all genders, all languages, all cultures. African genius, I'll say again, is not inborn or God-given, it would appear, but something we can cultivate through the agency of our collective will. I can't close without thanking the IAS Director, Professor Georgie Chikata, the Vice-Chancellor, the Provost, and indeed the local festival organizing committee, the International Pan-African Advisory Group, the Digital Pan-African team at Structivate. Thank you, and thank you. A personal thank you to all of you who braved the pandemic and came to converse with us today. Thank you very much for your kind attention and your patience.
Sit down.
Thank you very much, Professor Amina Mama, the fourth occupant of the Kwame Nkrumah Chair. So many ideas, thought-provoking and creative in many ways. May I use the opportunity to acknowledge the presence here of Dr. Yao Graham of Third World Network Africa, Dr. Emmanuel Akwete, Executive Director of IDEC, Ambassador Hananyako from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in Ghana, Karen Ekwemu Tando, Felix Nyako Adoyebo, Deputy Director, NDPC, Madame Shamia Nkrumah, daughter of Kwame Nkrumah, and of course, the many others who, by virtue of COVID protocols, face masks, I cannot recognize by name. Now, I have the honor to invite once more the Vice Chancellor and Chair of the occasion, Professor Nana Amba Amfo, to give us her closing remarks.
Thank you, Mr. MC, and thank you very much, fourth occupant of the Kwame Nkrumah Chair, Professor Mama, for giving us a very intellectually stimulating lecture on Nkrumah's legacy, feminism, and the next generation. For many of us, you provided us the opportunity to reminisce about our first president, what he stood for, his philosophy, his governance, his politics, and his contribution towards many spheres of our national life. And of course, your focus on Nkrumah as a feminist was quite striking. Certainly for him, all genders needed to have equal rights and opportunities. Respecting diversity was essentially what he stood for, in spite of the resistance that he had from some men at the time. And these are things that we can even now associate with. Yet, he did not relent in his efforts. It's sometimes quite disappointing, especially when you went to the point of speaking from Professor Chikata's publications, where several years on, you would have expected that would have made significant progress in terms of women's representation, even at a place like the university and the University of Ghana, so to speak. but I think that it is encouraging what we find these days, or where we have gotten to. Of course, at this time, having a significant representation in management and our governance. For the first time, having all our principal officers as women, and some significant management positions being occupied by women. I suppose that creates, that puts on us a huge responsibility to ensure that this doesn't end with us, and that beyond us, the generation that comes after us will significantly benefit from where we are now, and that we would see significant diversity in our national lives, and particularly in leadership. The University of Ghana's fourth strategic priority is gender and diversity. And so as a university, we have that responsibility to make sure that this permeates throughout the students' lives, faculty, and staff. Indeed, it is our responsibility to ensure, and it's quite, I would say, disappointing that in 2021 we do not yet have a gender policy. It's something that we are working at, and you can be assured that we are determined to have this in place, and not just have it sitting on our books, but ensure that what we put down, we actually we implement on the ground. Sufficient work has been done for us to be able to build on. For me, the lesson tonight is that what do we take from our history and our present to build our future? I will end my brief remarks with a quote from Nkrumah, which says that any meaningful humanism must begin from egalitarianism and must lead to objectively chosen policies for safeguarding and sustaining egalitarianism. He said this in 1962 and is still very relevant now. As an institution of higher learning, let's remember that Nkrumah championed, he was a man who just loved diversity. He loved the scholars. That's why he championed the establishment of the Institute of African Studies, among other things. He loved the market women. He loved the judges. He loved the parliamentarians, and all across board. These are lessons from him that we will take to make our future better than our present. Thank you very much, Prof Mama, for giving us that impetus for us to continue to think about these things and ensure that we make our society better. Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much, Professor Vice-Chancellor. All too soon, we are coming to the very end and about to draw the curtains on the program. But I believe it would be unfair to leave this room without reminding ourselves also that Professor Amina Mama is also the first woman to occupy the Kwame Nkrumah Chair. And I think that is very significant. The Institute of African Studies is very grateful for the generosity of a number of organizations and individuals who have made contributions to this program. In particular, AngloGold Ashanti, we are very grateful. Casapreco Company, Ghana National Association of Teachers, Organization of African Trade Unions, Communication Workers Union, Kwame Nkrumah Mausoleum, the Kwame Nkrumah Foundation, Mr. Alan Tremanti, Dr. Edward Mahama, Dr. Ekua Edusei Hebenston, and Professor Samuel Jando. We are extremely grateful to all of you, and we hope that you will double your contributions to this program in the years ahead. Now, soon after the appreciations, which will follow from now, the platform party will recite, after which every one of us will follow. Here is a brief explanation of how we are going to handle refreshments. Students, including our students from Accra Girls and those from Presec, and students from the University of Ghana, you will have your refreshments right here in the forecourts of the Great Hall. All senior members and invited guests and other visitors will have your refreshments on the left side of the Great Hall, right at this side. We have to do it this way in order not to violate any of the COVID protocols, and also to ensure that we don't keep too many numbers of people at any given time in a particular space, and also to allow people to be able to move out very fast. Thank you very much, and on that note, let me invite my colleague, Dr. Irene Apiani Ado, to give us the vote of thanks, after which we will take the university anthem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pesa White. You nearly messed up mentioning my name. But you did well, you corrected yourself. So, Madam Chairperson, Mr. Provost, Director of the Institute of African Studies, and our most valued invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, I deem it an honor to be called upon to give the vote of thanks for this special occasion. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Madam Vice Chancellor for gracefully accepting to chair the installation and inaugural lecture amidst your busy schedules. Madam, we are very grateful indeed. You will all agree with me that the fourth occupant, Professor Amina Mama, has delivered a very inspiring and thought-provoking lecture on Nkrumah's legacy, feminism, and the next generation. I guess we have all been educated in various ways. Thank you, Madam Occupant. My sincere thanks go to the Provost of the College of Humanities and other provosts from other colleges. We are grateful for spending time with us and supporting us, especially when we are all female and we also have all the provosts being males. Thank you very much. Let me express my sincere gratitude to Madam Director of the Institute of African Studies for graciously steering affairs and ensuring that this program becomes a great success. We thank you for your leadership. God bless you. I must mention my deep sense of appreciation to all our invited dignitaries, members of the Diplomatic Corps, IAS Management Committee, invited guests, both in this hall and online. You know, the program was streamed online. So we want to express our sincere appreciation even to those online. And the university community as a whole, as well as the general public, for participating and graciously accepting our invitation. We cherish your presence. I would like to express our sincere thanks to the media houses, Chris and his team, and the IAS audiovisual team for giving an excellent coverage to this program. Thank you very much. I would move on now, and I would like to take this opportunity to place on record our hearty thanks to the Office of the Vice Chancellor and the Public Affairs Directorate of the University of Ghana for all the logistics support and the guidance extended to the Institute during the planning stage. Thank you. Please allow me to appreciate our key sponsor, AngloGold, Mr. Eric Esubontin. We thank you for gracing this occasion and also for sponsoring this function. Finally, I cannot end this vote of thanks without mentioning the fellows, staff, and students at the Institute of African Studies, Ghana Dance Ensemble, and the MC for the marvelous job you did, and also for the entire community and the body of students for coming and gracing this occasion. Well, Madam Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, an event like this could not have happened overnight. Please allow me to recognize the dedication and commitment of IAS staff and the Kwame Nkrumah Chair Planning Committee for working tirelessly to ensure the success of this installation and inaugural lecture. Could you please rise for us to acknowledge you? You all did marvelously well. And on that note, I once again say thank you very much to all, and until we meet next time, please stay safe. Thank you.
So just before we take the university anthem, please, you are reminded that tomorrow, here at the forecourt of the Great Hall, will be a memorial service for Professor Kwesi Redu of Philosophy Department, who passed away. He was one of Africa's finest minds in terms of producing African-based knowledge. You are all invited to the program. Shall we now take the university anthem, and may you please be upstanding.
The University of Ghana, the nation so acknowledged.
Please be seated. Oh, okay. Well, they will have to stand again. Shall we be on our feet again as the platform party goes out? Thank you very much. I can run away now. Please, we have in my possession here the Ghana card for Frimpong Mark Eric. Ghana card for Frimpong Mark Eric. So if you are here, please see me for your lost but found Ghana card. Thank you.